Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. Happy March. We've officially made it to March. How exciting is that? My name is Lori Bumbaco. You are watching Ask the Dietitian. This is our monthly program that we run at Cancer Wellness Center. That is one of my favorite programs because we choose the topic and then we give our participants a chance to ask any question that they want related to that topic. Now, March happens to be one of my favorite months of the year. And that's because it's National Nutrition Month. Did anyone know that? National Nutrition Month. Yay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation, which basically goes through the questions that were submitted. And then I'm going to do my best to answer each of those questions as best as I can. Thank you so much for those of you who have registered to participate. You will receive a copy of the slides. And you get a couple other recipes that I like to include so that you can apply this information into your cancer protective diet. And if you're joining us on Facebook, welcome. Thanks for being here. We're happy to have you. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. As I mentioned, it is National Nutrition Month, and this is an annual campaign. They started that in 1973. So it hasn't been that long, but it's an exciting time of the year because it really raises some awareness around the topic that they choose. And this year they chose Beyond the Table. And essentially what that means is information about food from farm to fork, right? So more about sustainable nutrition, thinking about how the food arrived to our plate. What did it take to get there, right? So we thought it was only appropriate to choose this topic for the month of March for Ask the Dietitian, eating beyond the table. So again, like thinking about if you happen to sit at the table, sometimes we might not eat at the table, but if you're at the table thinking about how did that food arrive to your plate, right? What did it take to get there? And when we give it that thought, then we might recognize that there are some important steps for us to take so that we can continue to eat this way, and especially for our future generations to eat in a healthful way. So we're going to explore that today. So before I get into the questions that were submitted, just a reminder that for this program, Ask the Dietitian, we do ask that the questions be related to the topic that we're presenting, right? So this month's topic is Beyond the Table or Sustainable Nutrition. Now, it's inevitable every month there are questions that our participants submit that are not related to the topic. And it's not fair for me to take a short amount of time to answer all those great questions in an appropriate way. So we ask moving forward, just a reminder that if you know what the topic is, to try to submit questions that are related to that. If you have questions that are unrelated to the topic, see if you are eligible to meet with me one-on-one. Many of you might be surprised that you are eligible, and you and I can explore that together one-on-one, which is really the ideal situation, right? Because then I can give you the best answer that meets your specific goals and your needs. Okay, so just a reminder about that. Now, because we had so many great questions that were submitted, especially this month, but they weren't related to this topic, what we thought we would do is provide you a special program. Why not, right? So we have a program. It's scheduled tentatively for Monday, April 22nd, the same time slot from 1 to 2 p.m. And we're going to title it the Top 10 Common Cancer Nutrition Questions, because it happened again this month. I got questions about eating organic foods. I got questions about sugar. I got questions about how to make smoothies. And I think those are all really great questions. But again, I don't have enough time today to really give you the best answer for them. So I want to take the opportunity in April to do that for you. So I hope you will attend that one and learn a lot more from me. Okay, so on to our topic this month, right? Beyond the Table, Sustainable Nutrition. Here were the questions that were submitted. I thought they were all fantastic. What does sustainable nutrition mean? What is the actual definition? What are we talking about here, right? What are the keys to sustainable eating and where do I start? What are some examples of sustainable nutrition and the easiest sources of sustainable nutrition? All fantastic questions. So let's get to the story about all of this, right? So we'll start with those first two that are very similar. What is the definition? What do we mean when we say sustainable nutrition? Well, sustainable eating, we don't really have a technical definition, isn't really one thing. It does involve working to reduce our environmental impact through the foods that we buy, but also contributing to food security for the long term. So that's going to mean different things for different people, especially when we think of globally how we eat and how our food systems affect our food supply. So in order to achieve sustainability, we're going to have to balance a few things. We got to make some decisions about the environment, about our society and economy, so that our future generations can live and eat healthfully, right? Why are we concerned about sustainable eating? I learned this in preparation for the program. Our population is set to reach an estimated 10 billion by the year 2050. And all of us are going to need to eat, right? I hope. But as it turns out, our current global food system, it was not designed to support that. And it's not designed to adequately address the demands of an exponentially growing population, especially with how much meat and dairy we're eating. We're eating a lot. And we're going to learn today how much of our resources are used for the consumption of meat and dairy as it stands today. So here are some other concerning facts about our current food systems and our food production. A third of our greenhouse gas emissions come from food production. 60% of our Earth's land surface is used in agriculture and food production. So if we're going to have this huge population, where are we even going to live, right? If we're using all this land. And I thought this was an interesting fact. This is taken from earthday.org. So in the month of April, we celebrate Earth Day as well. So it might be good timing for that. But there's a lot of interesting facts on Earth Day, and I'm going to share that resource with you at the end of the presentation. I thought this was an interesting one. It takes more than 11 times as much fossil fuel to make 1 calorie from animal protein as it does to make 1 calorie from plant protein. Really interesting stuff here. And I thought this was another amazing fact. Half of all food produced on our planet never reaches our plate. Isn't that a shame? So I'm going to talk a little bit more about food waste today as well. So essentially, as we think about sustainable nutrition, generally, the most environmentally friendly foods are plant foods. What do you know? So whole plant foods, we do know are nutrient dense, and that's good news, right? If we want ourselves and our future generations to have adequate nutrition, plant foods do that. They give us ample amounts of vitamins and minerals, even amino acids, our high quality fats and high quality carbohydrates. They are all contained in plant foods. What do you know, right? So this is really important if we're looking to feed and stay healthy, right, for future generations. Plant foods tend to have a lower impact on our planet, and they tend to be more affordable. Now, that's a myth. A lot of people think that eating healthy is more expensive, and I don't have time to get into that today, but that would be a good Ask the Dietitian monthly topic. Plant foods are also more accessible. They should be, right, for some of us. And I know this, and I know you all agree with me. Plant foods taste good, right? They downright are delicious. Now, as it turns out, this is a bonus. Whole plant foods also have some of the best known cancer-fighting compounds. So that's a great bonus for those of you who are interested in the audience. All right, let's move on to the next question or set of questions. What are the keys to sustainable eating, and where do I start? I thought this was great. So I think this is a good graphic to summarize. This essentially are what the experts advise in terms of our pursuit of eating in a sustainable way. So we can first and foremost eat seasonal food and eat food that's produced locally, and that especially pertains to our plant foods, right? As it turns out, diversity helps our environment, right? So if we're only eating the same foods all the time, especially plant foods, then that's going to limit and actually take more of a toll on the environment and limit the health of the environment because we're only choosing 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe a handful of crops, right? But when we have a diverse array of options, and that's what that's what seasonal food does for us, right? What we can eat in the winter is very different from the summer if we're eating locally and with the seasons, right? So that's really beneficial for the environment. And I think too beneficial for nutritional well-being. We can grow our own food. What an interesting concept, right? That is one that I certainly need to work on. Eating less processed food, that's going to benefit us for cancer protection as well. But if you think about it, if our food is minimally processed, there's less resources involved in producing that food. We can reduce food waste, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then lastly, we can feed compost, like fruit and vegetable waste to livestock. I think that's a great idea, right? And then we can compost. Now, I'm not going to get into those last 2 points. That's not really my scope. And maybe you are already pretty savvy about composting your own waste. But that we're going to save for another time. Okay, I'm not going to talk about today. So let's talk first about eating seasonally and eating foods that are produced locally. So we can take advantage of farmers markets. If you have not already, please consider doing that. They're open year round. There are indoor markets that are within our vicinity. If you aren't aware, I'd be happy to help you. And I have a resource to help as well. You can consider joining a community supported agriculture, which essentially you kind of buy a share into the season of a local farmer, and it helps to support them throughout the season. Cancer Wellness Center has a CSA. So what that means is once a week or once every couple of weeks, the local farm drops off a share. It's usually vegetables. Sometimes they have other items in that share that you can sign up for. And it happens to be here, dropped off here at Cancer Wellness Center. And I'm so happy to have been a part of establishing that. It's a great option if you live nearby and you're also interested to visit the center as well. You could visit your local farm. They may have a farm stand. They may be looking for volunteers. How great would that be to support, right, our local farmers? And what this does is it avoids like all that extra packaging, all those extra resources that are required otherwise to transport our food. I think really the best reason to eat seasonally is that the food just tastes more delicious, right? When it's local and seasonal. So this, if you want to know how to eat more local and seasonal foods, there's a great website, buyfreshbuylocal.org, and it has like a wealth of information. So if you're looking about, you want to see about a local farm, you want to learn about a farmer market, you want to see if you can sign up for a CSA, they have tons of resources on this website. And what I like is that it's just specific to your area. So you can kind of input your zip code and you can learn what's nearby for you. I think this is great because sometimes for some reason I find myself in another area of the state and I just want to see, is there a farm nearby? Because maybe I have time to stop by. I mean, that's how much I have invested in our local farmers. And I think it's a great idea for us. I mentioned another way to eat sustainably is to eat less processed food. So if we think about what we're already doing, right? So take like an inventory. How much highly processed foods are you eating already? And then think about how you could gradually reduce that, right? So could you add, I like the idea of addition rather than subtraction. Could you add a new minimally processed food to your day or even to your week? Right? And then gradually work to add more and more of these minimally processed foods. Those are going to take less of a toll on the environment and this bonus of being more nutritious for us. What do you know? So we can also start to make substitutions or swaps, right? So we could swap out a highly processed version for one that's less processed. So this is a way to eat less processed food. I love the idea. I think most of our processed foods are snack foods, right? So I love the idea of having access, and this means planning, but having access to those less processed snack foods that are on hand. So it might be something like mixed nuts or roasted beans or hummus or even edamame. I love them in the pod to snack on that. Air popped popcorn, all plant foods, all minimally processed, all happen to be super duper nutritious at the same time. We can also swap out refined grains with whole choices. As it turns out, many of us are eating what the experts think are too many refined grains. So refined grains are really, they lose nutrition through the milling and the processing aspect of it. And we're missing out on the nutrients that are found in whole grains. And they have a much better environmental impact, these whole grains. So ways that we can do that is that we can replace a cereal that might be highly refined with something like oats. We can replace white rice with something like farro. And I have a great recipe to share for those of you who are interested. We could swap out something like croutons with nuts. Okay, not a whole grain, but it's a minimally processed food, right? So we still get that crunch in our salad, but we get more nutrition and it's less processed. Now on this slide, there's an image of a whole grain. I wish we could have audience participation. I'd love to know if you knew what this whole grain is. I know some of you might put it in the chat, so I'm just going to give a minute. This is a whole grain that you may or may not have heard of. So it is nutty in flavor. It's one of Africa's oldest cultivated cereals. So it's technically a cereal. It's not, so it's gluten-free because of that. It's been around for 5,000 years. It's sustainable because it's basically like drought resistant. It can grow anywhere. It actually grows on sand. That's why it's it derived from Africa. And it's known to be, it never embarrasses the cook. So it's super versatile, easy to prepare. And it also is very high in nutrients. It's known to be the lazy farmer's crop because essentially from what I understand, farmers could just scatter the seeds on the sand and it grows on its own. So sign me up for that, right? That sounds like my type of gardening. This gluten-free, highly nutritious grain has a lot of minerals, right? So there's a lot of iron, a lot of zinc, a lot of magnesium and other phytonutrients. Because it has like sort of a nutty flavor and because of the size. So if you think about how would we use this in the kitchen, we probably would use it in recipes that call for something like couscous or even quinoa, right? Because quinoa is very popular, but remember, versatility is helpful. So we could use it in things like salads. We can actually use it in baked goods. We can replace couscous, right? If we're making a tabbouleh, we can use this. So I wonder, I see some people have put in the chat. I wonder if anyone has guessed correctly. So this is fonio. It's spelled Fonio, fonio. And I have seen it in grocery stores. So look for it because it might just be a way to add different nutrients to your diet and certainly a straightforward way to eat more sustainably. All right, let's move forward. So what about reducing food waste? I talked about that. We define food waste as quality food that just simply is not consumed. So there might be a lot of reasons why it's not consumed. An estimated 30 to 40% of our food supply is wasted, which I think is a tragedy. And that equates with 133 billion pounds. Wow. So how can we reduce food waste? Planning is key. Right? Especially at home, right? So if we're going to talk about how to reduce food waste at home, think about what you're only going to eat, right? And try to be realistic about that, right? So you might have some great goals to eat more sustainably. You're thinking, I want more fruits and veggies. I'm going to try some of this fonio. If you're honest with yourself and you're not going to really eat it, especially in a timely manner so that it doesn't have to get tossed, don't buy it, right? So think about maybe having some staples on hand and then buying the fruits and the vegetables that you know you're going to eat within the allotted time that you need to eat it. We can repurpose parts and scraps, right, into other recipes, such as the carrot greens into a pesto, right? So if you've ever purchased the whole carrots with the greens attached, or if you go to the farm market, sometimes the farmers will rip off the greens and like have a little compost bin that they're tossing them in. Sometimes I've asked for them, like they've ripped it off for another customer. And I'm like, can I have those? Could you repurpose them? And vegetable scraps are great to use, like to make a vegetable broth or vegetable stock as well. So there's just a thought. And then also too, use that freezer. You know, there's ways, and I have a great resource, but there's ways to freeze what we might not have consumed so that you can eat it at a later date. It's going to save from food waste. Love that. Another idea is to enjoy more plants. And I love this idea again for the cancer protection. So take an inventory, think about how many plants you're eating now. Could you add one more plant food per day? I think you can, right? And if you're not sure if you can, then maybe it's one more per week. This will make the biggest bang for sustainable buck, right? Because I use that statistic at the beginning, how many more calories it requires to make animal proteins compared to plant proteins. So if we can start to make some substitutions, we don't have to be completely vegan, but if we can start to make some substitutions, we certainly are walking in the direction of eating sustainably. How to enjoy more plants. I love the idea of fresh fruit as dessert or a snack. Prep our veggies so they're on hand, right? That's part of planning. If we have them on hand, we're not going to reach for the highly processed snack that takes a toll on the environment and our resources, right? And it also takes a toll on our nutrition. So if we have those things made already and reachable, we're going to eat them. We're more likely to eat them. Now, someone asked the question, what are some fun things to eat besides fruits and veggies? Because I do seem to talk about them a lot. I love the idea of like your own trail mix, right? So air pop popcorn's great. Roasted beans are great as snacks, but you can kind of combine and make some really fun creations. And I use that word fun because I think it's you could be creative, and what a way to enjoy eating, right? When you can do that. But you can also add other nuts and seeds. Maybe there's a whole grain cereal that you have. And that would be a great way to enjoy something less processed to snack on, and it's plant-based. And then there's always this idea of like making swaps, right? So take something you're currently eating. Maybe it's meatloaf, maybe it's chili, maybe it's a burger, maybe it's eggs. Could you make a vegetarian version of that just to try? And it might open up some other possibilities for you. And you're on your way towards eating sustainably and also eating in a cancer protective way. Now, this I saved for last because, again, I shared I'm not so great at growing my own. This would be a personal goal for me. So think about what we can do, right? Maybe this is all brand new territory for you. So growing even just one more plant, maybe it's an herb or one vegetable that you choose, starting with one. And now's about the time, right? We're going to start preparing for this. This will be a way to sustain yourself nutritionally. You could use indoor gardening or container gardening if space is limited where you live. And I love the idea of an herbal garden, easy enough to do on your windowsill where there's ample light and enough room. And this is a great website from the College of Agricultural Consumer and Environmental Sciences at the University of Illinois. And it has really an extensive list of resources for starting your own type of a garden. Next question. We're halfway through. Doing okay. What are examples of sustainable nutrition? I love that question. So the World Wildlife Fund in 2019, so going back just a little bit, they came up with a list, a top 50 list of foods for healthier people and a healthier planet. And I just love this list. So I have the link for you at the end of this presentation as well, because I'm not going to give you the 50 foods. I'm just going to kind of categorize them. So one of them is algae or seaweed. Did you know that that was sustainable, right? Sometimes I get questions about that. But they listed seaweed like nori, which you probably are familiar with. That's often what sushi is wrapped in. Or if you've had roasted seaweed snacks, it's often from nori. Or wakame is another popular seaweed that you might find in the store, and it's usually dried. And they're delicious. They impart an umami flavor. They impart a lot of nutrition. There's essential fatty acids that are in seaweed. They're usually a good source of omega-3 fats and a lot of other antioxidants. The reason why they're sustainable is that they actually are responsible for half of all the oxygen that is produced on this planet. Well, thank you. Thank you, seaweed, right? And a lot of other aqua ecosystems depend on them. So they're really regarded as being critical for our existence on the planet. The good news about seaweed too is that it grows rather rapidly and it doesn't require any, in my understanding, any pesticides or fertilizers to help it grow. So super, super sustainable, right? And lots of ways to add flavor if you're looking for a punch in your dishes. Another group are cereals and grains. So I mentioned fonio, but other great examples in here are wild rice, which is actually a semi-aquatic grass. It's not technically a grain. Did you know that? Amaranth, millet, buckwheat, teff, all really sustainable in that they do not require a lot of work to grow. They are an important source for human consumption forever, since humans existed. They've really been sustaining us, and they've been thought to be a vital role in shaping human civilization. We certainly know that these minimally processed whole grains are packed with nutrition. They have tons of vitamins and minerals. They're high in fiber, which all of us can eat more of, right? And so they help to really promote our health and are cancer protective, but super important for sustainable eating. What I want to point out about these is that hopefully you notice I mentioned some uncommon, right? So we might know quinoa, but we might not work as much with amaranth. So the idea here is diversity. And if you're thinking about the planet, but also nutritional diversity, I think you're going to accomplish those two with some of these choices that I'm listing. Next are fruits and vegetables. How could I not mention fruits and vegetables? And they are really they're the superfoods, right? When you ask most dietitians, what should I eat if I'm looking to protect myself from cancer? And we're going to list fruits and vegetables highly. This list actually suggested okra as one of the more sustainable vegetables. I did not know that. And so you'll find okra, you might find it fresh, but you also might find it frozen, equally nutritious, equally good for the environment in terms of, it's taking less of a toll on the environment, and lots of different ways to use okra, right? But you might just look for traditional recipes and some Creole dishes, or even putting it inside a stew or a chili. It's a great way to add something that's going to add diversity to your diet. I don't know of many people who enjoy okra, but if you are willing to explore, I think it's worth a shot. And then it's a special group of vegetables, root vegetables. So particularly they mentioned members of the radish family, and then members of the parsnip family. So black salsify and parsley root, those are cousins of parsnips. And they certainly are hardy. So they offer that seasonal option, right? Because they can be grown in cooler and drier months. So this time of year, if you look at some local farms, they may actually have some of these as choices for you. And again, then you're eating with the seasons and you're eating locally. And then another option that they listed are nuts and seeds, particularly flax, hemp seeds, and then walnuts as well. My understanding with most of those is that they require very little, if at all, pesticides and fertilizers, so similar to seaweed. And nuts and seeds, I would put on the superfood list because they are packed. There's healthy fats. We get a little bit of protein in our nuts and seeds, especially seeds. And then we also get fiber, right? So it's like this dynamic group packed in all of those nutrients and delicious, right? And minimally processed. Really great options here. Okay, moving on. What else did they list? They listed sprouts. Does anyone enjoy sprouts? So something like alfalfa sprouts. Sprouting dates back for I think 5,000 years. So it's kind of ancient. And Chinese physicians actually used sprouts medicinally. They are concentrated in nutrition. So when we sprout, usually the nutrients that are inside are doubled, if not tripled. Now, sprouting could be a concern for anyone who is immunocompromised. So we typically don't recommend sprouting at home if you're on active oncology treatment. As long as you're not immunocompromised, it might be something worth exploring. It's sort of like growing your own, right? If you're sprouting at home, but certainly we do want to be aware that sprouting at home does carry the risk of bacterial growth. So we want to be careful for food safety concerns. How about cacti? Like prickly pear or cactus pear? Certainly something that is not in my regular diet. It's not just a decorative plant, right? We can eat cacti, and there are many species that are cultivated for consumption. And perhaps you have heard of Nepalese. That's a traditional Mexican dish, and I know it's delicious. I've had that. But cacti, I didn't know this was very high in vitamin C as well as E and some of our carotenoids, which are cancer fighters. They're anti-inflammatory. So great to know, right? But as you can imagine, cacti, like it sort of reminds me of fonio, like it can grow in the sand, it's resistant to drought. So it's got to be a sustainable choice. So might be something worth looking for yourself. And then beans and pulses. So particularly they mentioned lentils and mung beans and cowpeas or black-eyed peas, and then adzuki beans. Now, all beans are very nutritious, certainly very high in fiber, and then also offer plant proteins. But I listed some, I would say like black-eyed peas or adzuki beans. They're not typically what we eat, right? We typically go towards black beans or chickpeas or cannellini beans. So if you're looking for that diversity, this is one way to do it, right? Because a lot of bean recipes are sort of interchangeable, that you can sort of work with them. You could swap in one for another. And I think it's a great way to add that diversity and give yourself something that's sustainable in that sense. What beans do is they convert nitrogen from the air and they fix it to a form that can be used by plants. So certainly great for the planet, right? Next list, leafy greens. I would put these on our superfood list as well. They're arguably like the most versatile. Like if we think of leafy greens, like beet greens, broccoli rabe, kale, Chinese cabbage, spinach, of course, watercress, very super versatile and easy to use in a lot of different recipes and absolutely packed with nutrition. I always list spinach as being it's something that I think a lot of people are familiar with and consume often. But I don't know if there's a vitamin or a mineral that's not in it. It basically has everything, right? But if you're thinking of diversifying, think about those other versions of leafy greens that you could try. And then tubers. So tubers like jicama or ubi, which is purple yam. And they're resilient. They're sort of like those root vegetables, right? So they can be grown in the winter, the cooler months, and in the dry climates. And they're versatile, right? I mean, there's so many different ways you can use tubers. But if you're looking for a fun snack, I would say jicama is one of them, right? And they definitely offer nutrition. And then lastly, I wanted to mention mushrooms. So really, I thought would be more popular and trendy. I think they're still sort of working their way. And there's a lot of hope for mushrooms, but there's over 2,000 edible species of mushrooms. That's a lot. So talk about diversity, right? And they've been cultivated for centuries. They certainly are rich in nutrition. There's some B vitamins. Some mushrooms are harvested with vitamin D. And some have some protein and certainly have fiber. They can grow where a lot of other plant foods can't, right? So that makes them sustainable. They are not considered plants actually because they don't photosynthesize. So I was incorrect in labeling them as a plant. They're a fungi. But their texture is a great substitute for some of the meat choices. Not very high in protein. So if you're looking for nutritionally identical protein source, you're going to look towards beans and pulses, not necessarily mushrooms. But if you're looking for that mouthfeel and that flavor, mushrooms can sort of replace some of our meat choices in a very satisfying way. All right, moving on. So our last question, eating, what is the easiest way? So how do we eat sustainably and easily? I think that's a great question. I like racked my brain on this one, but I would say what we do most often is going to create the biggest impact, right? So I would just think about prioritizing plants, right? So if you think about whenever you eat, whether it be a meal or a snack, could most of what you're eating come from a fruit or a vegetable, or maybe a whole grain or a bean or a lentil or nut or seed, right? Lots of plant foods are going to really help minimize the impact on the environment. But you're adding so much nutrition. So it's like 2 for 1. Stocking our kitchen with staples, I think that makes life easy, right? So those whole grains, they can just sit in our pantry, right? Maybe it's fonio now that deserves a spot in the pantry. But beans and lentils and our spices, they are there for you and they're so versatile. And even canned beans, we're going to say they're considered sustainable. And can't get easier than that, right? A lot of our whole grains can cook within minutes, and you have the base or the foundation of a very nourishing meal. And then minimizing meat, right? So when you do these things, you're going to automatically kind of replace meat. And an idea is to kind of think of meat as like a condiment rather than the main part of your meal. Not only are these easy, but as I mentioned, they're likely to create hopefully the biggest impact because it's something that you're doing more regularly. So now to share some resources as well as recipes. So this is a really fun calculator. It's called Meat Free Mondays. So you can go on this website and it has a wealth of information, including recipes. So if you're looking for more, there's lots of meat-free recipes on this website. But this calculator allows you to learn for yourself, for your family, if you were to choose plant foods, how many times per week, how would that impact the environment? So I encourage you to check that out for yourself. I was really pleasantly surprised with what I saw and not creating a big change, even just for me, making one plant food choice a day. It was really a significant impact. Um, I, I mentioned Earth Day earlier. So this has a nice fact sheet, more interesting facts about how the way that we're eating impacts our environment. Food rescue is all about minimizing food waste. So if you're curious to learn more about like your scraps or how to use a vegetable from root to tip, this website's for you. There's lots of great information, lots of great ways to repurpose some of your scraps. I just highlighted that World Wildlife Fund, the top 50 list. That gives you a direct link to see more about the specific foods that were listed. And then sustainable seafood, right? So I think this is an important point to make. So some of our seafood is actually taking the way that it's fished is taking a toll on the environment, right? So there are more sustainable choices that we can make. And this is a great website, Seafood Watch, and it's from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And it isolates specific areas of the country where you can find local choices that are taking less of an environmental toll. Now, these recipes, I had to include. The one in the middle is farro. And a lot of people ask me, how do you use farro? Well, this happens to be a very popular New York Times recipe. And I think Ina Garten even prepared it. And it's so delicious. I promise you, I think it like kind of speaks to spring because there's some fresh herbs, there's some radish in there. And it's really a great way to make a hearty salad that is nutritious and also sustainable. On the far right, that's a vegetable pasta, but not just any vegetable, not just any pasta. It's looking to really take advantage of some diverse choices and then using a whole wheat pasta, right? So less processed. And then that's a no bake, like a tropical no bake bar. So a lot of times we're looking to minimize our highly processed foods, and snacks typically are highly processed, right? So could we make our own and make our own version that's going to be less processed, but just as delicious and more nutritious? So bonus there too. So stay tuned. Our next Ask the Dietitian in April, early April, the first Friday, is all about nutrition to support energy and reduce fatigue. So many people who are diagnosed have fatigue, and there are some interventions that are being explored to help minimize the amount of fatigue that someone experiences, and certainly through food choices. I shared this image. It's Potato Pete, and he's an energy food, if anyone didn't know that. This was a political marketing campaign in the United Kingdom during World War II, just like we had here. During the war, the government was encouraging a lot of people to grow your own. And so if you weren't familiar with that, that's where Victory Gardens came about. So the thought was that if you grow your own, that you're supporting the country, right? Because you're not taking away from resources to support the war effort. So I thought that was cute. And maybe we'll talk more about the potato, the humble potato, during that next Ask the Dietitian. I hope you can join us. Okay, so I'm going to end my share there. And I'm going to take a peek at the chat just to see if there's anything that I can share, if there were questions.
I do have a question, Lori.
We had